Hey, all my physics students, how's it going? Mr. Thrasher here. I've had a long day. Today I have graded all the final exams. I have scored them from either a 1 through 5. I have uploaded all this information into Canvas, and I've made this video for us to talk about the scores, how I in fact graded the exam, and what your potential next steps are. This is of course something I would normally be doing kind of live in class, and obviously it's unfortunate that we don't really have the opportunity to do like some quick questions about methodology and all that. So I wanted to make a video. I wanted to describe all the main ideas, the main points. Of course, if you have questions, let me know. Okay, but here's the purpose. It's kind of broken down into pieces for this video. All right, first, we're going to look at what you see in Canvas, or approximately what you see in Canvas, and how that matches or what that means in terms of your grade. Because there's all of a sudden 3 columns in Canvas for your grade, and only one of them is actually affecting your grade. So we'll talk about that. We will look at our class-wide, our whole section-wide, 4th and 6th period, our test results. How many people got 5s? How many got 4s? What was our passing rate, right? And I also want to talk about how your test was graded, because I make certain assumptions as kind of a faux AP grader, and a few of the questions were changed. While they were all official AP Physics 1 test questions, originally I had to change a couple of them because I wanted them to match this year's exam, where everything can be answered as a written response. Okay, and then we'll talk about some next steps, whether or not you still have questions or how to check the rubric with your actual responses. What about getting test correction points? So we'll go over that as well. Okay, so first thing, let me pause for a moment. Okay, if you saw this graphic kind of jump up, I realized that my screencasting was cutting off some of it, so that's why I had to pause. Now, in Canvas, to be honest, what I see might be slightly different than what you see, but you know, I see like your name, all right, and then like there's your overall total grade, and then here are the 3 columns that might be new to you if you log into Canvas. Let me talk about what these 3 things represent. I'm actually going to start in the middle. Okay, this right here, this number, this amount, this is the actual quiz, right? Your final exam was a Canvas quiz. All right, and here it is in the grade book. And there were 2 questions. The first question was 12 points. The second question was 7 points. That means the quiz was out of 19 points. I went through, I graded them, and this is how many points you got. So on this final exam quiz, this person got 11 out of 19. So this is the raw score. I know it's cut off a little bit, but if you could expand this, I think it says AP Final Exam raw score. Now, this quiz is marked as an assignment in Canvas, which means this does not affect your grade. Whether I put in a 0 or 19 or 15, that would not change your overall grade percent. So this is just info. What was your raw score on the free response? This person got 11 out of 19, which is pretty fantastic. Right here, this is what College Board would have awarded them, or you, based on this score. Remember, and I'll show you more details in a second. Remember we said like, oh, you get around half the points, that's what you need to get a 3. You know, around 75%, that's what you need for a 5. So after I found this score, after I added up the scores, I then used College Board, not my own, College Board's rubric to figure out, okay, what percentage of the points did this individual get? And therefore, what does that line up with? You'll see that more later. So this is just a number out of 5. This is like the score you would have gotten if this was the actual AP exam. Okay, so again, this is also graded as an assignment. This does not affect your grade, so don't worry about that. Okay, but if you just want to know what score would I have gotten if this was an AP test, bam, this person got a 4, which is fantastic. Now this last one over here, final exam Thrasher score. This is the part that is affecting your grade. Remember, technically the final exam is 10% of your grade. I know that's not as meaningful since we have this a credit, no credit. But I decided just to keep the same rubric we were discussing before we had this coronavirus. And what I had said was if you got a 5, that's 95%. A 4 is 85%. A 3 is 75. A 2 is 65. A 1 is 55. And this should match. And I just made it out of 100 points. It doesn't really matter. It's the only thing going into this final exam category. So this does affect your grade. Okay, if I put in a 55 or a 95, obviously that would change your grade right here. As I said before, this did not make anyone's grade, with maybe one exception for someone who just didn't take the final exam, didn't make anyone's grade significantly change between those two things. Okay, credit or no credit. Okay, so that's that. If you go into the quiz, if you go into the actual final exam quiz, I think you see something kind of like this. For this student, remember, it's out of 19 points. This was their score. Obviously, this should match. And then you see this weird thing. Mr. Thrasher was trying to balance a couple of things. I wanted to grade your test as soon as possible so we could start looking at our exams and start doing corrections or kind of analysis. But also, I wanted to give you feedback, and admittedly, I kind of dumped giving feedback in exchange for grading these quickly. Because if I made comments after every question, I would be grading these for 3 or 4 days. What you see right here, this is a little weird, okay, and I apologize, I could have made it more clear, but it just would have taken more time. This is showing how many points you got right for each of the 2 questions and the letters for those questions. Here's what I mean. Question number 1, there were 5 parts. There was question 1A, B, C, D, E. If you look down here, right at this top, this row at the top is representing question 1. This person for 1A got 2 points. For 2B, they got 0 points. For 1A, 1B, 1C, they got 2 points, etc. So this is showing how many points you got correct. The second row, that's question 2. Okay, here's 2A, here's 2B. Couple things. 1, this should add up to be this. Okay, if that doesn't add up, let me know. All right, we'll double check and make sure things are accurate. But if you add up all these numbers, you should get the total score. Also, I have now posted the grading rubric for this final exam on Canvas. It's a homework due Monday. Okay, so what you can do right now, this is part of your process of reviewing. You can open up that rubric and you could see, okay, for question 1A, that was out of 2 points, because it'll say it right on the rubric. It'll say 2 points. Well, what did you get? Oh, nice. This person got both the points. For question 1B, that was out of 3 points, if my memory serves me. Oh man, this person didn't get any of those 3 points. If this was your quiz, what you should do is now look, okay, where were those 3 points assigned? Oh, did I write that? And I altered your quiz, so now you should be able to view your responses. If you can't go on Canvas and see your quiz responses, let me know. Maybe I gotta try and fix something. Hopefully you can see your responses. Okay, so that's how you can kind of decode this. I know it's not as nice as me like writing down comments. Okay, if you have questions, as I'll talk about later, we can chat either via email or in person. But here's a way you can see what points you got and what points you didn't get. Okay, let's talk about our scores. Let's see how we did as a class. I didn't break this down into section or anything. To be honest, I may have miscounted. I was just quickly going through Canvas and adding up score totals. Okay, I was just going back here and looking at how many 4s we had, how many 3s, etc. This is our score breakdown. Okay, of my class of, there's about 52, 49 took this exam. A couple of people took a makeup exam. Someone didn't take an exam. Here's our breakdown. 8 people got a 5. 27, oh my god, look at this. The vast majority got a 4. Okay, 9 people got a 3, and 5 people would have not passed. They got a 2 or a 1. What does this mean for our pass percentage? This was a 90% pass rate. Remember, passing is getting a 3, 4, or 5, and this is fantastic. 90% of you passed the AP exam, or our mock version of the AP exam. Lovely. Now, some things to keep in mind. All right, the first thing, when you see 90%, hopefully like, oh man, we did great as a class, and you did, and I feel that way. If you're thinking like, oh god, 90%, I mean, clearly Mr. Thrasher messed up because it shouldn't be that high. This 90% pass rate is very similar to my prior year mock AP final exam pass rates. I've always done this mock AP test. Obviously, this version is a little different, but usually my pass rate for this final exam is like 84, 85, 86, 87. It's in the mid to high 80s range. So this is kind of matching pretty well. On average, the score people get on their final pretty closely correlates with the score they've gotten historically on the AP exam. Okay, usually people who get 4s, by and large, get a 4 on the actual test. Now that's an average. Certainly I have people who get a 4 on my final who end up with a 5 on the AP exam or a 3 on the AP exam. Okay, if you got a 2 or a 1, I'm not saying at all you're somehow forced or you're somehow now destined to get a 2 or 1. I always have kids year after year who get a 2 or a 1, and then on the AP exam, nice job, you got a 3. So you're not bound by this, but this does match what I've done in past years. So I think this was a decent, I won't say great because, this is a very strange year, but this seems like a decent way to assess how we're doing. So if you got a 2 or a 1, you can definitely still pass the AP exam, but make sure you review this exam, do some practice before the last chance, before the AP exam, things like this. Now, this second bullet point, was this an honest test? Frankly, only you know whether or not you took this exam kind of in a faithful way. Like, if you went online and you Googled the answer, nice. I guess that's resourceful of you, right? But obviously you getting a 5 or a 4 is now kind of meaningless, right? So if you're still taking the AP exam, whatever your score is, if this wasn't a real honest undertaking, make sure you were doing studying and all that. Likewise, maybe it was totally by accident, but maybe you stumbled upon one of these questions before. That's possible. That's not a problem. I'm not upset or anything, but recognize that then maybe this isn't an as adequate judge. If you took these 2 questions and you had never seen them before, you weren't texting your friends, you weren't on a Discord live call, and you got a 3, 4, or 5, you should be extremely proud of yourselves. Nicely done. Your work over the years has paid off. Okay? Now the last thing is, I made some assumptions, right? College Board has not published exactly how they're going to grade these free response questions this year. What I essentially did was I took the percentage that gave 3s and 4s and 5s when the full exam was given, and I just said, does that percent match the now test out of 19 points? I'd be surprised if College Board did something radically different, because that would upset a whole bunch of people, right? Teachers have always known this test for 6, 7 years now, and they've prepared students in a certain way. So it would be surprising if they all of a sudden come out with a totally different way of grading these exams, but it is possible. So obviously I can't make any solid guarantees. Okay, but it's not really in College Board's interest to have something totally out of left field this year. So I think this is decent. Okay, I think it's decent. All right, how did I grade your rubrics? How did I grade, I should say, your final exam? Okay, one, again, these were official College Board questions, and the rubrics are now posted. As I said, I use those rubrics. It wasn't, does Mr. Thrasher think you should earn a point? It was, do you earn a point from what the rubric says? All right. Now, sometimes this is a little problematic because the rubric doesn't go over every single possible type of answer. And sometimes there's a little bit of reading between the lines. Like if a rubric says the speed increases because the energy increased from before. Well, if they don't explicitly say, like if you don't explicitly say because the energy increased, can I still give the point? Can I not give the point? Sometimes they say explicitly stating X. Well, you can have different degrees of being explicit. So sometimes I have to kind of judge, do I think they'd give a point? Do I think they wouldn't give a point? And you could very well argue, Mr. Thrasher, you were too strict on this question. Or, oh, Mr. Thrasher, I kind of got away with something. I don't think you were strict enough. That's fair. But again, I'll kind of remind you that my pass rate has fairly decently matched the actual AP exam. So I'm making some assumptions. I think those assumptions on average are okay. All right. And then this point right here had to adjust 2 questions to match us. In fact, 3 questions. Remember, for this year's AP exam, you're not going to have to do any mathematical derivation. They're not going to ask you a question to derive an equation. However, and also like making a graph, making a diagram, some of these questions, because I took these from past exams, they did have that, and I tweaked them a little bit. And since I tweaked the question, I had to tweak the rubric. I'm going to show you those in just a second. Okay, and you could very well argue, oh, Mr. Thrasher, you changed this question, you graded this in an unfair way. That's possible, right? And we could discuss that later if you want. For example, one of the questions, here's question 1 on the final exam. Okay, for part B, originally it was asking you to derive an equation for E max. Historically, this was a very tough problem, 1B. Very few people got all the points because you had to recognize that the maximum energy was the initial energy and that is gravitational potential energy. The right answer in the original version is UG equals M times G times H, or M times G times D. I didn't want you to have to derive an equation, so what I said instead was, what does E max have to equal? And maybe I could have worded it a little better, that's certainly possible. But I then tried to morph this rubric. So I gave essentially 2 points if you made it clear that the maximum energy was the initial gravitational potential energy. I gave you 1 point if you implicitly or explicitly said that E max is the same as the total energy or the same as the initial energy. And to be honest, I kind of graded this pretty strict because, again, historically, this was a hard question. Very few people got all the points. So I kind of had in the back of my mind that I wanted to grade this in kind of the same way. Could that be considered unfair? Maybe. Okay. Some people, I'll just say, if all you said for this was E max is the maximum energy of the ball, to be honest, it's likely I didn't give any points for that. Okay, because that's just kind of reading what this says. Oh, E is energy, max is max. Oh, so this is the maximum energy. For me, I believe, in my opinion, to get points for recognizing what E max represented in this scenario, remember, trying to compare it, match it to this scenario. It's that total energy. You can't lose more energy than you started off with. So it's that total initial energy, and that was potential energy. There was another question. It was asking on my final for you to analyze whether this graph was correct or not. In the original, you had to draw this graph. Again, it was a hard question. So was this graph correct? It was. In fact, on your final exam, I just copy and pasted the College Board's solution, this graph right here. So this graph was perfectly correct. Where did I assign points? 1, did you make mention that this graph should not have touched this axis, that it's valid that there's a gap. And again, the oil can't have 0 stiffness, so this does make sense. A lot of people didn't get that point. Again, this was a tough question, so I tried to have kind of a specific thing to match historically it being a tough question. Okay, I didn't really mind if you said like this should be linear or concave up or down, that didn't matter. But did you give me a physics explanation that it does make sense that when the stiffness increases, there's going to be a lower increase in kinetic energy, a lower change in kinetic energy. So the graph was correct. You had to give me an explanation about why it made sense that it was correct. Lastly, real quick, the second problem, it originally had you draw 2 free body diagrams. Well, I didn't want you to have to draw, so instead I gave you a free body diagram when it was moving up, and I said, was it right or wrong? It was wrong. There were 2 mistakes. You essentially got 2 points if it was, if you mentioned those 2 mistakes. This problem usually had about half the people get all the points. It was probably a little easier on my version because it's, you probably know right now that normal force should be perpendicular. There is no pushing force up the ramp. So I did do a little tweaking. You could very well argue that that's unfair, or that would really have made you earn a higher score than you actually did for this test. We can talk later if you want. Now, here's something interesting. Remember, I say I use College Board's rubric. I don't decide where the points are assigned for the most part. I use College Board's rubric. But there's a problem. I used 2 questions from 2 different exams. Question number 1 was from the 2017 exam. Okay, question number 2 was from a 2018 exam. And if you notice, the range of scores, and again, these exams were originally out of 80 points, right? Multiple choice, all the free response. But if you notice, these ranges are different. The 2017 exam is easier to get a higher score. Notice, for the 2018 exam, you needed 61 out of 80 to get a 5. But in 2017, you needed 55. And that's probably, and I don't know the full range of secrets from College Board, but probably the conclusion is the 2017 exam was harder. And so because it was harder, they lowered the needed points. What rubric did I use to grade your exam? Did I take an average? Did I use the more difficult of the two? Did I use the easier of the two? I decided to use the lower, the easier of the two rubrics. Okay, now one, I kind of wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? Because maybe this year's test, the 2017's test, was really hard because of that oil problem, right? And therefore it should match the range. Okay, I wanted to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, so I used this easier rubric. Now, you should note, maybe I should have averaged them, or maybe I should have been really conservative and used this one. Because you might now want to think about the fact that if I use the easier exam, maybe if I should have used this one, your grade might actually be like a number lower. So if you got a 5, awesome. But you might want to think, well, I got a 5, maybe a 4 on this AP test. If you got a 3, be like, okay, nice, I got a 3, I did nice, I did a good job. But, I need to be a little wary because it's possible that could have been a 2. So you guys did a great job, but be aware that it's possible I should have used a slightly higher range of scores for those values. And then what did I do? I just found percentages. So originally, to get a 5 on this 2017 exam, you needed to get 55 out of the 80 points. 55 divided by 80 is 0.6875. So you would have gotten a 5 on this year's exam, or that year's exam, if you got 68.75% of the points. And then I just figured out what is 68.75% of 19, because that's how many points this year's test was out of. And all your tests, there are no half points given. So I found that number and I rounded up. So if this ends up being like 13.8, that means you would have had to have gotten a 14 or higher. Okay, so that's what I did. I literally just translated these minimum scores into percents. I multiplied it by 19, and this is what I used. So if you're like, Mr. Thrasher, what the hell, I got 11, but you only gave me a 3, you should email me because I made a mistake. Or let's say I gave you a 5, but you actually got 13. Well, you might want to email me, that would lower your score, but you might want to be like, oh man, Mr. Thrasher graded my thing wrong, but I actually should have gotten a 4. But this was this was how I scored your response. If you got 14 or higher, you got a 5, 10 or higher, you got a 4, etc. Okay? I'm almost done with my video. I know this is kind of long, but I wanted to really debrief this exam. Your next steps. Okay, I mentioned this a little bit. I have enabled, I believe, now I'm a little new to this with quizzes on Canvas and stuff, so let me know if you can. But I believe you can go back to that quiz and you can view your responses. And again, in the comments, it looks very benign. It looks very weird. I just put these numbers. This is showing how many points I thought you earned for each part. And I've posted the rubric on Canvas. So what I would do is I would find time over the weekend, print out that rubric, okay? Then sit at your computer, go back to your free response test, look at the problems, and look at the rubric. Okay, you might be like, oh yeah, okay, I didn't include that point. Oh man, I was way off. I should have been talking about energy and forces, etc. Okay, so that's your goal. That's part of your homework. These 3 bullet points here. I am going to make a solution video. I probably won't get that posted until like Sunday. If you're seeing this before Sunday, that's my goal. Okay. I've also posted, or I'm about to post, optional test corrections. I wanted you to have the rubric, but obviously giving you the rubric kind of makes test corrections lose meaning. So I'm just going to put another free response practice. And if you complete it, it's optional. You don't have to. I won't give you a 0 out of 5. But if you complete it, I will go back and I will raise you that 1 numerical score. So remember, if I go way back here, oh my gosh. Okay, if you got a 4 and then you do test corrections, I'll raise this to a 95. If you got a 5 and you got 95, I'll raise it to 100. I know, I recognize the stakes are pretty low because you're pretty much all getting credit right now anyway. But again, we're really just trying to practice. And if you want a helpful hint, this free response practice, this is the makeup final. I made 2 final exams. The one that I'm talking about in this video, and there were a couple people who couldn't take this original exam, so I had to make a makeup. It's another free response. So it's just one more form of practice. Maybe you take out your phone, use a timer if you're trying to prepare. Okay? Oh man, last thing, last slide. If you have a question about your score, if you don't think you should have lost a point here, you're not sure why you lost a point, couple things. First, I want you to remember this is a low stakes exam. Okay, pretty much everyone, 99%, everybody but maybe 1 or 2 people in the entire class, they're getting credit for this, this semester, regardless of what you've earned. So it's possible. You might read the rubric, you might read your answers and be like, Thrasher, you done messed up. I should have gotten all those points. You only gave me 2 out of the 3. I should have earned them all. You done goof, Thrasher. But you could also just kind of let this go. Because again, this isn't preventing anybody from earning credit. Okay, and obviously you're very much entitled for us to discuss and, argue your grade points, and maybe I'm like, oh yeah, you're right, you should get a point back. But if that happens, if I get 50 people arguing points back, you're definitely entitled, but that's going to take me a long time to set up a time to discuss, for us to look at the problems, to talk via email, via Zoom. So it's definitely allowed. It's definitely possible. You're allowed. You're entitled. But please be aware, if you want to discuss points, you're going to have to give me some time. It depends on how many people want to argue and debate points, but just please be aware, it might be several days before I get back to you. We'll talk about it. I promise you. We'll discuss it. Okay? But it might take a while if I'm getting a huge surge of people coming in. Okay, so that's my last thing. I know this was a long video, but hopefully now that clears up things about where your score came from, the rubric, how I graded it, my methodology, things like that. Okay, thanks a lot for watching.